What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. So used to just being in a Champions League routine at this point, but it was a midweek set for domestic leagues to get those extra games in because of the World Cup, whether that's league games, cup games, whatever it might be. So we're going to get to all of that here at the beginning, and then second part of the show, playoff time. MLS, NWSL, terrific slate of games coming up starting Thursday night all the way through the weekend. So I'm going to walk through all of them, talk about sort of the biggest storylines, the keys to those games, and set the stage for what should be a fantastic week of soccer here in the U.S. But as I said, we're going to start midweek action, and the only place to start is Manchester United beating Tottenham in the game of this midweek slate anywhere in Europe, and of course, going to focus primarily on the Premier League here. And after I talk about this game, I was going to talk about a couple different ones that happened today. But instead, based on sort of what's been going on and the results of these Wednesday midweek games, I want to actually just sort of talk about the league as a whole and specifically the top of it and these big six teams and sort of where they're all at. So that's what we're going to do next. But I couldn't and didn't want to ignore what Manchester United did. And this game really left me with a lot of things I wanted to say, so I want to take a while to talk about it here. First, I can't remember the last time I saw Manchester United control a game against an opponent with elite talent the way they did this one. Now, was it perfect? Certainly not. Did they control all 90 minutes? No. But when you're 2 goals ahead with 15 minutes to go, you don't need to be in control. You can just sit back, play defense, and attack on the counter. So I'm not holding that against United at all. When it mattered for the first 60, 75 minutes of this game, Manchester United were not just winning, they were actually dictating the terms of the game. And this is the huge difference. This is the kind of stuff you want to see when you're talking about progress under Erik ten Hag. The kind of stuff his teams were so good at when you're talking about Ajax. Now, maybe not necessarily against the very, very best teams in the world, but against teams that were better, more talented than they were even, they had the ability to not only play an incredibly attractive brand of soccer, but to be multidimensional and to actually use the ball, possess the ball, to impose their will on a game. And that is something United has struggled with forever. Jose Mourinho, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, the sort of framework, the blueprint was the same, and it was built on counterattacking. One of the biggest narratives that United needs to address to take the next step and actually become a factor in a title race again is their consistent inability to break teams down that just sit there. Right? You see it all the time. I mean, to a certain extent, you saw it against Newcastle a matter of days ago, which makes Tottenham a really, really interesting test for Manchester United. Because I said before the Manchester derby, I'm not sure how much we're going to be able to learn about United here. Because this game, now it didn't end up going this way, and I'll get back to this game later on. But that game was set up for United to be able to play on the counter because Manchester City is all about possession and control. Tottenham is all about sitting back, counterattacking, and trying to control a game through defense and winning 1-0. So to get this win in this fashion is a really, really good sign for Manchester United. It wasn't breathtaking stuff in attack, but when you control the ball, when you have a majority of the possession, you can do things like take shots that aren't exactly supposed to go into the net. And when a team is in a low block and a bunch of guys are just all over the penalty box, Sometimes you get fortunate and you get a deflection and the ball goes in and you're winning 1-0. And that completely changes the game because it ruins Tottenham's game plan. That's the kind of stuff that you don't get to do when you're only relying on counterattacks. So that is a major, major plus and one of my biggest takeaways from this game. If Manchester United can do that more often, because even in some of their wins this season, I didn't feel like they had really ever had control of the game against Arsenal. It's why I wasn't worried about Arsenal coming out of it. Yeah, United had some good moments. They scored some goals. But it was never convincing the way it was in this game. And some of their more famous wins recently, not of the convincing variety. And the second part of this is defensively. Since that Manchester City game, United have given up 1 goal in their 3 Premier League games. Now, I understand Europa League is a different conversation that I don't really want to get into right now. There are still offensive issues, and I will address that in a minute here. But in the Premier League, defensively, since they've gotten sort of set up the way Ten Hag wants, they have been really, really good with the exception of that Manchester City game. And I said after that Manchester City game, I'm not sure this is really a commentary on United as much as it is just there is nobody in the world that can do anything about that when City shows up and 5 attacking players are all playing like they're the best player on the field. And I feel even more confident in that assessment now based on what United have done since. All that being said, I am still not convinced by this attack that you can get the goals you need game in and game out to keep pace with the best teams in this league. However, they are getting more consistent. I am trusting them more. I do believe this is significant progress. You just see some of the wasted chances over these last couple games, specifically Marcus Rashford. You see what's happened in the Europa League. There's still a ways to go. But Ten Hag is beginning to shift the narrative for me. He's changing the way I feel. They are, from a game-to-game standpoint, becoming more reliable. And that's the first step. It's going to be a process. It is going to take time. And to a certain extent, I almost think this question of is United back is kind of a silly one because A, it's relative, and B, it's not like there's going to be one game where they come back. That's just not how this works, especially with where they've been. It's going to be a slow climb forward, but they are making real progress. On the Spurs side of this, I understand Dejan Kulusevski isn't there. You're really short in attack at the moment. Richarlison also unavailable. Lucas Moura comes off the bench. The attackers and the front three, the way Conte designed it and wanted it with this transfer window, is not available. I understand that, and I don't care. You had Harry Kane and Son Heung-min out there. That's more than enough attacking talent. And today was the point where I decided I'm done sort of giving this team the benefit of the doubt and being patient that they're going to figure this out in attack. I have said this before, and I will continue to say it. And this is in no way contradictory to what I said in the weekend roundup about Manchester City being more vulnerable than people acknowledge and the fact that they are not playing at this unbeatable level. It's an incredibly high bar still. You cannot hang with the top teams in this league, be it City, the way Arsenal are playing. We'll get to some of the other teams here in a little bit. With a one-dimensional strategy of trying to play for a clean sheet and counter a goal on a counterattack by absorbing pressure and hoping you can release your attackers from that. Because it is not going to work a high enough percentage of the time to pick up the amount of points you need to get into a title conversation. It is that simple. Is it enough to get into the top 4? Maybe. But Conte is not brought into Spurs just to get into the top 4. That money was not spent over the summer to reinforce this team the way he wanted to get into the top 4. And they've just been incredibly disappointing. And I understand, off to their best start in 50 whatever years, or whatever that number is, on paper it doesn't look bad. But when you actually, and I've seen Spurs fans acknowledge this, when you actually look at a game-by-game breakdown, it's just not pretty. And so when you actually go down a goal, you're in big trouble because your entire approach is predicated on being able to keep that clean sheet until you launch the counter to score the goal. And it's also reliant upon your strikers taking an incredibly high percentage of the chances that are created because you're not going to create all that many. With Kane and Son in the team, that's not as big of a concern for me. But there are so many things that have to go right for this approach to work. And there is no reason this group of players should only be able to win this way. There's way too much talent across the board. And this also gets into the one-dimensional thing. I talk about this in the context of the playoffs in particular, but it's also true when you're trying to chase this bar set by Manchester City. You got to be able to win more than one way. There are going to be games where you give up a weird goal like this one, where your attack doesn't click, where you miss a couple chances you would normally finish. Whatever it might be, you have to have, and this is where I'm seeing evolution with United. You got to be able to do it more than one way. And Spurs have shown no ability to do that basically this season. With maybe the exception of that Leicester second half, but that was just Son being his brilliant self. Every once in a while, that's going to bail you out. But even Harry Kane, here's the other number that's deceiving. I think I saw somewhere Harry Kane's off to his best start of his Premier League career in terms of goals per game, or amount of goals scored through 10 games or whatever it is. But how many of those have come on penalty kicks and set pieces, right? The corners and the PKs. He's not scoring all that many goals from the run of play. And you had that stretch where Son wasn't scoring, and that now he's really started to pick it up. He didn't have a good game in this one. But no, all of this just feels incredibly deceiving to me when you look at the actual numbers, the points, the record, all of that stuff. It is not sustainable to play this way, and there's no reason Spurs have to play this way. This is a choice by Antonio Conte. And it might work in Italy. And I mean, I guess in his defense, he's gotten it to work in England. I would just argue he got it to work in England before the bar was this high. And before you had Manchester City's, 98-point, 100-point seasons. And again, that's not the Manchester City team of this season. We're talking more probably in the 90 to 93 range. But now you also have Arsenal, who are not dropping points, and these other teams to deal with. There is nothing to point to other than this is an intentional choice by Spurs that is not conducive to getting where they want to be. That is the bottom line for me. It'll work sometimes, but it's not going to work enough for you. And it might not even be enough to get into the top 4. I'm going to have that conversation here in a minute. There is too much talent for it to look this bad this consistently, and especially against the better teams they play. It's one thing to play on the counter against Manchester City, and Spurs have had significant success doing that recently. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about going extended periods of time, entire halves, without being a factor in attack and doing it, North London Derby. And in this game. Now, they did respond in the North London Derby. This one, they didn't even really come that close to responding. I mean, Lloris kept him in the game in the first half before the goal started going in. It is just not a sustainable way to play. And now it's starting to come back to bite them. I was really high on this team. I thought this was going to look a lot better than it has. And this was kind of the breaking point for me. To watch it happen again and them just be so lethargic and have so few ideas going forward. in the moments in this game where it actually mattered. I'm curious to see if Conte is going to keep doing this or if he's going to let these guys really go after it and attack. I'm all for having a defensive base you build off of. What I am not for is being so reliant on that defensive base that you only try and win one way. And you have all this attacking talent that lets you do so many other things if you would just give it a chance. All right, so that is that game. And I also want to take some time to talk about the bigger picture at the top of this league right now. Because I can't remember a point where I felt the gap between just talking about the Big Six for a second, team number 1 and team number 6 was this small. Now, it's still significant, don't get me wrong. I'm not here saying that Manchester City and whichever team you have at the bottom are similar. Not what I'm saying at all. But there was always a team or two that you just kind of realized didn't have it and weren't going to be Champions League contenders. Usually it was United or Tottenham. And, Chelsea would have a weird season here or there. And by and large, the past 5 or so seasons, you're very confident in Manchester City and Liverpool. But now you have this situation where, as I talked about on Monday, and go back and watch that video if you want to hear more about this, but this is there for the taking if somebody can put it together for 38 games. I'm still picking City to win, but this is a title race. It's not can somebody catch City, it's can somebody keep pace, and there's a difference. For me, everything in these midweek games reinforced the idea that the two teams who didn't play, Arsenal, are making up their Europa League game with PSV that got postponed tomorrow, Thursday, which is why they didn't play Manchester City today. That game got postponed, which results in neither Arsenal or Manchester City playing in this midweek slate for the Premier League. Those two teams are a step above everybody else. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I am all in on Arsenal, and nobody needs convincing about Manchester City's greatness. After that, I've got no clue what to rate the other 4 teams. I just talked for 15 minutes about my concerns about United and Spurs. I am also buying Chelsea under Graham Potter. Also a Chelsea team that dropped points against Brentford today. And then there's the Liverpool angle of this. Mo Salah looks like himself again. That is a massive deal in terms of Liverpool's hopes of getting into the top 4. I think the title hopes are already gone with the poor start they had. But they got themselves back into the mix by beating Manchester City and following that up with not a great performance, but they got the job done against West Ham. Defensively, it's been much better. They seem to have figured out some of those issues. Some of those players are just performing better. You thought you were going to lose Trent Alexander for a little bit at least, and it appears he's recovered. He's already back playing. The one thing, though, and I talked about I don't want to hear excuses on the injury front for Arsenal, or for Tottenham, sorry. Jota, Diaz are gone for an extended period of time, which leaves you with Salah, Nunez, Firmino. And, Klopp and understandably so, Klopp got rid of his sort of depth pieces in attack, your Minaminos and your Divock Origis of the world. And so all of a sudden, he went from having 5 guys to having 3. And 2 months ago, if you would have told me Roberto Firmino is going to be out here playing a key role, I would have said, well, something's probably gone wrong, and something did go wrong. I mean, I guess that's still a fair assessment. But it's not because of Firmino out there. Firmino's been phenomenal. But those are the 3 guys moving forward through, we're talking probably up to the World Cup, that you're relying on an attack. That really scares me. If there was one, if you hadn't lost Jota and Diaz, I would feel much better about this. But it is still Liverpool. Andy Robertson is back playing well. Like I said, they seem to have sorted some things out in terms of the chances they were giving up and just this weird disconnect between the defense and the midfield and all that stuff. And now you got a little bit of confidence going to come off this win against Manchester City. And you followed it up with another 3 points. I can make a case for all 4 of those teams finishing third. And I can make a case for all 4 of those teams finishing 6th. And then you got to throw Newcastle in this mix too. I've been banging the drum for Eddie Howe since he got this job. I do not understand why people thought this was a questionable or strange hire. I just will never understand that. Am I convinced they can hang for 38 games? No, not quite. They haven't been good enough so far for me to believe that. But they are a factor in this equation that needs to be mentioned. Brighton have really fallen off. Part of it is the games they've been playing. Part of it was that was not sustainable. And part of it is they've stopped putting the ball in the net. I've talked about this extensively. All of the beautiful possession-based stuff, all of the XG, doesn't get you very far if you don't actually finish your chances. And it's the difference between having, your Salahs, your Kanes, your Sons, your Mounts, Aubameyang, Sterlings, your Rashfords, Fernandezes, Ronaldos, your Martinellis, Jesuses, Sakas, Odegaards. You can go down the list. And being Brighton, with all due respect. That's always been the question for me, and what it's going to take for them to go from being the 8th best team in the Premier League to the 5th or 6th is you got to go for an entire season taking your chances. They did a great job of it for a while, and now they're starting to struggle with it again. And that might just be the end of their top 4 hopes, because I see 7 teams I feel good about at this point. And Brighton, I feel good about Brighton. Brighton is not one of those 7 teams. Brighton is 8 for me, probably. So I'm going to talk about these 7. But I just have I'm going to continue to back Graham Potter. I really like what I've seen from Chelsea, and they're starting to put wins together. I know that winning streak came to an end here, but I'm a believer in that. United's going to have to prove it more for me to buy them as a team capable of finishing a top 4 with this many legit contenders. And Liverpool's going to have to prove to me that they're capable of failing to make the Champions League. So right now I'm still going to bet on those 4. City, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool. Probably in that order. Wouldn't be surprised if it goes a different way. I don't feel good about that at all, to be honest. But I'm going to back Graham Potter, and I'm going to back Jurgen Klopp. And this group of players from Liverpool that has done this so many times before. And is starting to play much, much better. The way these points are getting dropped by these teams in that top 4 race means that Liverpool was still very much alive, even though they started so poorly. They just needed a couple results to go their way and to pick up a couple points they probably weren't expecting to get, or some of these other teams aren't going to get. Maybe that's the better way to put it. And, beating Manchester City is one of the ways to do that. They still have some work to do to continue to catch, and again, those injuries are concerning for me. It is a reason, not an excuse at this point for Liverpool. But the rest of the team is starting to get healthier, starting to play better. Those are just ultimately the 2 teams I have the most faith in. Outside of just assuming Arsenal and Manchester City are going to be top 4. That's really what it comes down to for me. I like what I've seen from Erik ten Hag. I love the players available to Antonio Conte. There's a piece missing for both of those teams, though, that hasn't shown itself yet. I feel better about Liverpool and Chelsea at this point. And I do think Newcastle still ends up 7th. But we're getting to the point with the money they have and the way they're performing that we're going to. I'm not there yet, but we're probably going to get to a point pretty soon here where we're going to start talking about this as a Big Seven and reevaluate the way we see this league because of the combination of Newcastle's money and Newcastle's performance. Don't think we're quite there yet, but we're starting to need to be paying attention to having that conversation. That's all I've got on the league as a whole. I just wanted to talk about some of that on the back of these games today. We've had good title races between Liverpool and Manchester City, but the fact that everybody is kind of clumped in there together makes this season even more interesting for me. I hope it continues this way. I really think it might. And when you talk about why the Premier League is the most popular league in the world, it's because things like this are possible. And it makes it awful fun to pay attention to and awful fun to talk about. That is all for Premier League conversation at this point. Going to take a quick break. And when we come back, it is time to set the stage for MLS playoffs and NWSL playoffs over these next couple days. Going to break down all the matchups, the things I'm curious about, the biggest questions, and what I think are going to determine those games. You are watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. It is time for MLS NWSL playoff preview, starting with MLS. I'm going to go in chronological order of the times these games are being played. So that means we begin Thursday with the Eastern Conference matchup, FC Cincinnati coming off their win in, New Jersey against the New York Red Bulls at number 1 seed Philadelphia Union. The storylines for these games write themselves. It's been the conversation the other times these teams have already played this season. Cincinnati, at least reportedly, tried to hire Jim Curtin, did hire Chris Albright, did hire Pat Noonan, did acquire Ray Gaddis, did acquire Sergio Santos, all from the Union. They don't exactly play the same way, but the tenets of everything the Union have done to build themselves into this incredibly successful, sustainable franchise is trying to be replicated by these former Union guys in Cincinnati. Cincinnati show up in the playoffs for the first time, get their first playoff win, and so it's just only fitting they now have to go to Philadelphia and go through the Union to get where they want to be with all of these former Union people now in Cincinnati. Couple things I want to mention here. The Alejandro Bedoya injury situation does not sound good from what I've read. I would be surprised to shocked if he starts. I'm not convinced he's going to be in the 18. We'll have to see. I'm also debating how much of a concern that is for me from a Union perspective. Part of me loves Jack McGlynn and thinks it's not that big of a deal, and part of me is well aware that that basically they lost the Supporters' Shield when Bedoya got hurt from a results standpoint. Because there was a moment they were in control of it, and then they had that bad game in Charlotte, and LAFC did enough. Though it is worth pointing out, if this was basically any other league in the world, the Union would have the Supporters' Shield via goal difference. But it is not. It goes by wins, and therefore the LAFC have the Supporters' Shield. So there is an argument, even though the Galaxy have all this to say, there's an argument, even though the Galaxy, even though LAFC, is what happens when you try and multitask, LAFC won the Supporters Shield, there is a real argument. Yes, I just wanted to confirm goal difference there. Yes. There's a real argument LAFC, even though they won the Supporters Shield, weren't actually the best team in the league if you look at goal difference. But MLS goes by wins. It is what it is. Just wanted to make that point when you're talking about who is the best team in the league heading into the deeper rounds of these playoffs. All that to say, so there was a moment very briefly where the Union were in control from a points per game standpoint of the Supporters Shield. They had that loss in Charlotte. LAFC did enough down the stretch to get back to a point where they were in control because of the tiebreaker. And that happened during Alejandro Bedoya's injury. He does all of these unquantifiable things for the Union. And so ultimately, I'm on a scale of 1 to 10, my concern is a 6. I'll go that high with it. What is going to determine this game for me is Cincinnati's front three against Philly's back line, Jose Martinez and Andre Blake. Specifically Martinez in the back four. So I'm just calling it a back five. Martinez is there to limit the effectiveness and to track players exactly like Luciano Acosta. And this is, without a doubt, the best defensive unit this league has ever seen. Cincinnati's attack has been fantastic. And it allows them to get away with some defensive mistakes because they are so good with that front three. Brandon Vasquez is continuing to make people ask Greg Berhalter why he's not a factor in the U.S. men's national team. Brenner struggled in his postseason debut. You got to think he's going to be much better in this one. So that's what this is going to come down to for me. Is if Cincinnati's front three have their way and they are loud and causing all kinds of issues, Cincinnati has a really good chance to win this game. If Martinez is able to disrupt sort of that connection between Acosta and Vasquez and Brenner, if the Union center backs do what they've done all season and are able to really sort of smother those two forwards, then it's going to be a tough go for Cincinnati. That's what it's going to come down to for me. If the best players on the field are Cincinnati's star attackers, they got a really good shot. If the best players on the field are the Union's defenders, Andre Blake or Ura or Gazdag or one of the Union attackers, Cincinnati's in trouble. So that's what I'm looking for in terms of how does Cincinnati find a way to pull the upset? They gotta win the battle with that great Union backline. Or at least do enough. I don't see the Union getting shut out at home. If you can score a goal, hold on, and then get to extra time penalties, that's another way to do it. But it's ultimately going to come down to who wins that battle between one of the best attacks in the league and the best defense in the league. Next, we have the one and only El Trafico. Got to get one more in there before they play in the Rose Bowl. First and foremost, well, maybe not foremost, but the thing I'm most interested in. What lineup does Steve Cherundolo put out there, and how does he use all these players? I talked about this after they won the Supporters Shield. The easy part is figuring out how to do it over 34 games when guys have injuries. You're going to rotate your squad some anyway. That is set up to allow a team built like LAFC to succeed. Now you got 90 minutes. Your season is on the line against your arch rival, and you can't play all of your best players. Does Cherundolo sort of stick with what got him here and bring Gareth Bale off the bench? Or is this the moment where we've been waiting this entire time, ramping Gareth Bale up? You had the luxury of not needing to force him into anything because of all these other great players you have. But the whole point was to bring him in for the playoffs. So does the switch get made? I'm really curious about this. To me, this is one of the biggest storylines of the postseason. In terms of what's going to determine this game, I have two big questions. And I'm going to stay. The obvious thing is to point to the stars: Ricky Pooch, Chicharito, Carlos Vela. You can go down the list. That might be where the game gets decided. But I want to go somewhere else, and that is first, what do the LA Galaxy get from their wingers? Because this is the difference between the two teams. Now, LAFC's midfield does not have somebody like Ricky Pooch in there. I'll acknowledge that off the bat. But the Galaxy have Chicharito up front. And LAFC have, Dennis Bouanga and Arango and Carlos Vela and Gareth Bale. You can go down the list. The wingers. Grancier, Cabral, and Douglas Costa all have not been very efficient in front of net, not been very confident in the final third, let the Galaxy down at different points. They have not been anywhere near as reliable as LAFC's supporting attacking players. You're going to need something more than Pooch and Chicharito to beat this LAFC team. There's every chance that one decisive moment falls to somebody not named Chicharito, or that player needs to make a good decision about whether or not to get the ball to Chicharito. Something. Can they deliver? They don't have to be the best players on the field, but do we walk away from this game feeling like they were a real negative for the Galaxy? Or are we pleasantly surprised by what they were able to do and the impact they were able to make? Again, they don't have to carry the team. You got guys to do that. You got the firepower. But you need more than two guys to play with this LAFC team. And then number two, I'm going to talk about this until the end of LAFC season, and then I will probably talk about it after LAFC season ends one more time. And particularly in this game, because it has a tendency to be just unbridled chaos. Does LAFC have to go off script? Can they get this game to go the way they want to? Get the first goal, press high up the field, control things from that, that way they want to play, and be able to, use their midfield to cover all of this ground, do the things their midfield is great at, get the ball to Carlos Vela, all of that stuff? Or is it a repeat of what has happened in the past on a couple occasions where the Galaxy strike first, and all of a sudden you got to sort of rewire everything? This is my question about LAFC, outside of what I already talked about in terms of the actual roster. Do you have a plan B? I talked about this with Spurs. It's a little bit different, but it's the same idea. Can you, because there just is nothing predictable, and it is so hard to control the circumstances that get thrown your way in the MLS playoffs. It's the beauty of this competition. There is no rhyme or reason to anything that happens, it feels like. Can you dig yourself out of a hole if you go down a goal? Can you win an ugly game? And I don't think it's going to be this one, but this is something else they've really struggled with in the past under Bob Bradley. Win that ugly game where you don't have everything, it's choppy, it's a bunch of just sloppy play in midfield. You're not able to get this smooth flowing attack going. It's probably going to happen at some point. Can you win a 1-0? Can you adapt to whatever gets thrown your way? Because if we've learned anything about El Tráfico, there's always something. And LAFC have gotten steadily a little bit better at that. But this game is, and I do think they're better prepared for this, the way they're playing this season than under Bob Bradley. But to me, it was not a coincidence they struggled so much in this matchup under Bob Bradley, because these games were everything he doesn't want. It's just a bunch of craziness. If we get that again, I'm curious to see how LAFC respond. And to me, the first goal in this game is going to be huge and it's going to set the tone. I know that's true of every game, but particularly this one, because there's a way LAFC want to play, and not that they, of course, they're capable of coming down from a goal, but I have a hard time seeing the Galaxy digging themselves out of a hole. But I said this before, I want no part of this matchup if I'm LAFC. I picked the Galaxy to win this game. We'll see if I come back to regret that. But those are the things I'm looking for in this matchup. What is the actual starting 11 for LAFC? What do the Galaxy get from their wingers? And does this go to plan for LAFC? And if not, how do they adapt? Then to the other two matchups on Sunday, starting with NYCFC at Montreal. Both these teams advancing in comfortable fashion. Montreal took a little while to get, well, both teams took a while to get the opener, but then they really cruised after that. NYCFC bringing an end to Gonzalo Higuain's professional career. Congratulations to him on a phenomenal season for Inter Miami and what he was able to turn this final season into. He deserves a lot of credit. Wanted to mention that quickly. On to this actual game. First thing, what role Talles Magno, Tavon Gray, Keaton Parks play in this game? Do they play a role at all? Now, Keaton Parks did get on the field in the last one, so you got to assume he's going to play a role. But Talles Magno is huge. And I mentioned this in my MLS playoff preview. In a world without Tati Castellanos, you need somebody to be that high-level elite attacking player. As good as NYCFC are kind of across the field player to player, they're so well balanced. They give you a little bit of everything. You need the difference maker. That's why they spent this money on Magno. That's what he's been this season to a large degree, sort of taking over that spot. And if you don't have him, I mean, they looked great against Inter Miami. They can win this game without Magno. My concern was more when you get to the final couple rounds, I just don't think they have enough firepower to repeat. But my pick, and I did pick them to win this game, my pick might change if Magno is not in the 18. The other thing I will say, though, and why I picked NYCFC to win this game, apart from everything I like about them, and feel even better based on their performance against Inter Miami, the crowd in Montreal was great. This is not about Montreal being an easy, quote-unquote, easy place to play. This conversation you're having about, the fact nobody showed up for the New York Red Bulls home playoff game. Montreal was a fantastic atmosphere. Those fans delivered. I'm just not scared of playing CF Montreal in Montreal. Look at their record. I would much rather go to Montreal than go to Philly. I said again in my playoff preview, if Montreal can get past the home games, I like their chances a lot. They've been sensational on the road this season. There just isn't, their game translates really well. But it doesn't give them a massive home field advantage. So for an NYCFC team that went and played in Portland for MLS Cup last season, played in Philly in the Eastern Conference Finals, they're not going to be faced by this. It's going to be a great atmosphere. I'm really looking forward to this one. That's the second point I want to make, though, is I feel fine if I'm NYCFC with the way this played out. What I think is ultimately going to determine this game is the midfield battle. Whatever variation that ends up being for NYCFC, can Maxi Morales be the guy to pull the strings? And Montreal, Jordan Mihailovic, Ismail Kone, they're not the biggest names in the world, but they are so important to what Montreal does. And Montreal, you could throw, Ramel Kyoto into the kind of what role does he play in this game as well. They don't have that elite striker that terrifies every single team they play. They got guys who can score goals. Be it Kyoto, be it Kai Kamara. But Jordan Mihailovic has to be the difference maker. And Ismail Kone has to be kind of that secondary difference maker, that other guy who could step up the way he did in this first playoff game. If NYCFC are able to neutralize those two guys, I really like NYCFC's chances. That's what this is going to be ultimately decided by from my perspective. So definitely keep a close eye on the midfield in this one. And then rounding it out, we've got a Texas derby, if you want to call it that. FC Dallas at Austin FC. Dallas get through, well, both of these teams got through on penalties. Leading to my first question, which is, which team shows more attacking intent? Dallas definitely had the better of the play overall against Minnesota. Weren't all that inspiring, though. And Dallas, again, certainly had the better of the overall play, but were also, down 2 goals by that point. And they found a way to get the goals. But it never felt inevitable. It never felt like it was this onslaught of just good chance after good chance, and ultimately one of them was going to go into the net. I never felt that way watching that game. Austin have to be much more efficient, much more effective in attack to beat FC Dallas. This is a different level of opposition than an RSL team that was missing some key pieces. It's also worth noting, both meetings between these teams this season ended in draws. Dallas Blue leads in both. Austin have been, I believe they are the best team in MLS. If not first, they're up there in terms of coming back from losing positions, picking up points. Comeback wins, stuff like that. This is not something that is specific to their games against Dallas, and they just showed again against RSL. But if I'm Josh Wolf, I don't want to try my luck. You got away with it once, and you got the help of a red card. And on the Dallas standpoint, to make a run, you got to find a way to hold a lead. So that is a really interesting aspect of this game for me, is if you're Austin, can you not fall behind for once? And if you're Dallas, can you continue to at least give yourself a chance to keep within striking distance? Ideally, can you get that first goal and really take some air out of the building and cause some stress? Because that was ultimately kind of the thing, and Taylor Twellman kept harping on this during the Austin game, and he was right. It just never felt like Austin had a real solution, that there was a real sense of urgency. If they fall behind again, they're certainly capable, but I'm not convinced they're just sort of inevitably going to find a way. As good as they've been this season, as good as that attack is. So that is something really notable to watch for in this game. Is both other meetings have played out to a similar story. Do we get a repeat of that, or does the story change here this time around? And then finally, do Dallas's difference makers show up? Sebastian Driussi is going to show up. I don't have a doubt about that. You got to have somebody to sort of hang with him to compensate for him. Jesus Ferreira missed a sitter that would have avoided this penalty shootout for Dallas, and did not have a particularly great game. Paul Arriola did some good things. Alan Velasco didn't have it. Those front three were not spectacular against Minnesota. You got to take it to another level in this game. It's a better team. You're on the road. It's a much better offensive team as well. So, can you get the best out of these guys? And it's also worth pointing out, Philadelphia. No USMNT guys that are going to the World Cup. Montreal. I don't think Jordy Mihailovic is on the plane, so no USMNT guys going to the World Cup. NYCFC. Don't think there's any USMNT guys going to the World Cup. Cincinnati. Maybe. Again, if you're asking me, I don't think they have any. Go to the Western Conference. LAFC. Okay, Kellen Acosta. Austin. And that's your playoff field. Jesus Ferreira, Paul Arriola. Can somebody from this U.S. men's national team continue to play in the postseason and actually make a deep run to an MLS Cup or something so that everybody isn't sitting around for, it'll be just under a month at that point. But you're quickly running out of USMNT players still in this tournament, which is another part of this for Dallas, is those are the guys who need to deliver, and it benefits the U.S. men's national team if they do and Dallas is able to advance. All right, that is all for MLS. Now jumping to NWSL. We are already in the semifinals. San Diego getting the better of Chicago thanks to an Alex Morgan goal. First question here, how do Alex Morgan and Taylor Korniak respond to having to play all of those minutes, coming off of those injuries? It wasn't like they played 60. They played over 90 intense playoff minutes. We're thrown right back into a grinder of a game. Are there any repercussions for that? Because San Diego needs those two players to be as close to 100% as possible. It's a good sign they were able to go as long as they were in that game and that there was no plan to take them out after 75 minutes regardless. Their team needed them, and they were able to deliver. So that's a good sign in terms of their health. What were the repercussions, if any, of that, though? That's the first thing I'm kind of curious about. Second, can San Diego limit Portland in 1v1 situations? Malpew caused some havoc getting isolated against players in that first round game. Malpew is also one of the best, 1v1 wingers in the world. But Portland have Sophia Smith, also very good in those kind of situations. The job doesn't get much easier in terms of trying to stop these players. You went from one U.S. women's national team star to another one. For a Portland team that scores so many goals, you gotta limit those opportunities. You gotta be fundamentally sound defensively. You gotta be able to get over and get that extra player in position, whether it's to block a shot, to make Sophia Smith think twice about shooting, whatever it might be. Can you keep her kind of corralled, and can you keep bodies around her? And maybe it's not even her, maybe it's, somebody else. But can you avoid those isolation situations? And if you're in them, can you avoid them being incredibly damaging to your team? Because that was what they were at least able to do. They survived, and eventually Mallory Pugh just ran out of gas. Now you got Sophia Smith. Third, I just put down two words. Kaylin Sheridan. To me, she is the X factor in this game. And that could mean two completely different things. That was a really bad mistake that gifted the Red Stars the opener. It's not the first time that has happened. She is also the best goalkeeper in this league. She can win you a game. She can save penalties. She can do it all. Can she avoid Another one of those catastrophic mistakes. Can she just be more confident, make better decisions, playing out of the back and with her distribution? And if called upon, can she save her team a couple times in situations where most goalkeepers just can't? Because she is that gifted. That's the other part of this for me. I think there's a decent chance, for one reason or another, we're talking about Kailen Sheridan at the end of this game. If I had to pick one or the other, I'm going to say that she really delivers and keeps San Diego in this game, maybe longer than they should be. But we will see. So those are my three things. Taylor Morgan, Alex Morgan, Taylor Korniak. How do they respond to these injuries after playing all of those minutes? Can San Diego keep these dangerous Portland attackers out of 1v1 situations? And what kind of Kailen Sheridan performance do we get? And then finally, Kansas City Current went into Houston, got the win, which sends them to OL Reign, your number one overall seed. Very simply, my first thing here, can Kansas City weather the storm and take the crowd out of this game a little bit? Seattle doesn't have the Sounders in the playoffs, which I think is noteworthy in the sense that it's just going to help build momentum and excitement and attention for this OL Reign game. This is your postseason soccer, Seattle, and Seattle delivers when it comes to soccer environments, postseasons, all of that good stuff. I expect this to be a great atmosphere. The first thing you want to do if you're Kansas City is find a way to limit that a little bit, make that crowd uneasy. Even whether that's ideally, scoring the first goal, but even if it's just avoiding something in the first 25 minutes of the game, being able to settle in. The second thing I want to point out here, Kansas City had the lowest goal differential of any playoff team. OL Reign had the second highest. This is very much an underdog going on the road to face a clear favorite. So you gotta, and that kind of goes into, I'll just throw the third thing out here right now too. Kristen Hamilton, CC Kaiser, Kansas City Strikers. Can they take their chances? Everything suggests this game is going to be dominated by OL Reign. They are the better team on paper. They're the more talented team. They're also the better defensive team. So, assuming this game goes to plan, I find it hard to believe Kansas City is going to be able to create all that many chances. They didn't create an exceptional amount of Houston. They did what they needed to survive. This is a whole different kind of test. In those moments where chances do present themselves, can you take them? Can you be incredibly lethal in front of the net? Because that's what it's going to take to have a chance. You've got to sort of defy the balance of this game and find a way to steal a goal, steal two goals, get a penalty, whatever it might be. So those are the things I'm looking at here. Is you know what you're up against if you're Kansas City. This is a team that's done a phenomenal job overcoming key injuries that would make this a little bit more balanced on paper if everybody on Kansas City's roster was actually available. They're not. They've done a terrific job finding a way and sort of, probably disappointed a little bit to end up as the 5th seed. They were even higher than that for a while. But here they are. They've got a playoff win under their belt. Got to have a big game from your attackers. Not necessarily in the being major factors in the game, creating all these chances, but they need to be at the top of their game. Those few moments, those half chances, can you steal something kind of out of nothing and give yourself a chance? Can you steal a first goal against the run of play? Something like that. Ultimately, I'm going to stick with the two home teams. San Diego exerted a lot of energy to get to this point and are still dealing with some injury stuff, even if, Alex Morgan, Taylor Korniak played plenty of minutes. Still find it hard to believe they're 100%. That's got to count for something. Portland got to rest after some of their players were, on international flights, all of that stuff. And I'm picking OL Reign to win this whole thing. I said at the beginning when they clinched the NWSL Shield, you don't see a combination of a team playing this well and a team that is this good this often. They kind of had this late season surge to win the Shield, which is where they were supposed to be all along, but they weren't. So it all clicked these last couple months of the season, last few weeks of the season. And now you got a home game against a team you should beat. I expect them to do that, and I think we're going to get the matchup of the best two teams in this league in the final, which is Portland and OL Reign. We shall see, though. That is all for MLS NWSL playoff previews for this next round of games. I'm going to take one more quick break and come back and finish things as always with the weekend look ahead. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back one more time to the Touchline Talk Show. It is time for the weekend look ahead. I already talked about MLS and NWSL games. Oh, I should mention the NWSL games also Sunday. So you got Thursday, Sunday for all of these games domestically. So I'm going to focus on Europe in the weekend look ahead. Starting in England, very interesting set of games here. The three I want to highlight: Brighton at Manchester City, Manchester United at Chelsea. Those are on Saturday, and Newcastle at Tottenham on Sunday. I spent 10 or so minutes talking about how I feel like these are the 8 best teams in the league, how I feel like there are 7 clear top teams in the league, and that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those 7 plus team number 8 in Brighton. Now, Brighton is playing at Manchester City. They've had this really tough stretch of fixtures here. It hasn't gone very well. Manchester City need to take all 3 points from this. The way things have gone so far, it's a game where Brighton could be phenomenal in front of the net, finish their chances, and all of a sudden it gets real interesting. And then Manchester United, Chelsea. Fascinated. I love the timing of this one. Manchester United, how do you come off of this really good performance against Tottenham? Chelsea, can you get back on track after a draw and win a game you should win at home? And then Newcastle, Tottenham. Newcastle, can you really insert yourself into this top 6 conversation? Tottenham, can you stop the bleeding and get avoid this from getting worse than it already is, because you're still in a good position table-wise. In Spain, Sevilla at Real Madrid on Saturday, Atletico at Real Betis on Sunday, and then also Sunday, Athletic Bilbao at Barcelona. 2 really good tests here for Atletico and Barcelona Barcelona in particular coming off of El Clasico. Athletic Bilbao have been really good this season. One of the better teams in La Liga. That's a good test, a game they should win at home. A game Barcelona has been winning this season. They're not losing in La Liga. Can they continue that? Or are there even more ramifications for this tough stretch they've gone through in the past week or so? I guess week and a half at this point. Italy. 2 good games here to mention. Lazio at Atalanta. Atalanta trying to keep pace with Napoli. Napoli, who visit Roma. Both those games are on Sunday. Napoli haven't had all that many high-profile matchups in Serie A so far, but you get one in Roma. Roma, the numbers will tell you, have been phenomenal. I'm still having a hard time buying it because of their struggles in the Europa League. The overall picture is not as pretty. But the numbers will tell you they've been one of the best teams, very best, right up there with Napoli in Serie A. So that should be a good matchup. Germany. Stuttgart at Dortmund on Saturday. Bayern Munich at Hoffenheim on Saturday. And until somebody actually catches them, I'm just going to start throwing Union Berlin in here every single week. They play at Bochum on Sunday. I usually just talk about the favorites. And Union Berlin have a little bit of a cushion there, so I'm going to, out of respect for what they've done, despite the numbers suggesting there's no way in the world this should happen, I'm going to start throwing them in here every week. And then France, want to mention two games that I find interesting. Neither of them actually include PSG, but Lens at Marseille on Saturday. Marseille struggling a little bit here, coming off that loss to PSG. Can you get back on track? Lens having a very good season. And then Monaco at Lille on Sunday. Jonathan David having a phenomenal season. These are two of the higher profile teams, two of the better teams in this league. Haven't exactly gotten off to terrific starts. Can one of them get it going a little bit? That is all for the weekend roundup. That is all. Sorry, the weekend look ahead. That is all for the show today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.